Now, moving on to other challenges. So we've talked about some of the day-to-day challenges, especially around hair care. We've talked about the challenges in the current climate in the UK. Now, the next challenges are focused around challenges in the workplace, and this affects adults, but also children who want to aspire to get into careers, professions, workplaces. Um, Obviously, we're in the social work background, I am, and so this is focused on the kind of social work sector. However, there's similar data related to other sectors as well. And I'd really encourage people from various sectors to actually go in and look at your own sector, the data around your sector, or the data around where you live, because understanding data is really important. Um, Anyone who's in children's social care should be aware of this report that was published in March 2025. It's called It's Silent Race, Racism and Safeguarding Children. Really, really important report. It's only about 60, 70 pages long. It's not very long, but it's got excellent findings. These are some of the learnings from the panel. There's more. It kind of talks about the inconsistent recording of ethnicities, and it's really important that because one of the big issues faced by people who identify as black is how they're just lumped into one category when actually it's not as simple as that. There's also a lack of direct attention to analysis of impact of race, ethnicity, and culture and practice. It's something that's often, missed or not given the attention it's due, or the impact's not factored in. And then, even more damning is a failure to recognize and name racism, bias, and wider systemic experience of discrimination. Often in a lot of organizations, they don't even have training around anti-racism, or they'll kind of bury it within, cultural bias or unconscious bias or cultural humility training, as opposed to anti-racism training. This is what racism is. This is how we become anti-racist. A lot of this also relates to things like, complaints processes, grievance processes, where actually, rather than understanding and dealing with the matters from a meaningful perspective, there's almost battling like, oh, we haven't got racism, doesn't exist, we're great, everything's fine. And that's actually counterproductive. It leaves the people who are distressed raising the grievance unheard. The patterns and the systemic racism continues, and it just gets worse. And then it also impacts on, the children, wider people in the community as well. And that's also, you can see that today. For those of you who haven't seen it, Panorama did a documentary recently on the Metropolitan Police at the Charing Cross station. Now, the reason why it's so damning is probably 4 or 5 years ago, there was a similar documentary, and then there was a whole plethora of work. We're going to address it. We're going to stamp out racism. Even before that, people are familiar with the McPherson report, and how it obviously talks about the institutional racism in the Metropolitan Police. Again, decades of we're going to sort it out. Yet this Panorama documentary released just a few days ago just shows how prevalent it still is, and how actually impactful and damaging it is to people who identify as black, and also Muslims, because there's obviously it featured a lot of Islamophobia as well. So this is why, again, even from the social care context, it can't be underestimated and it can't be minimized. And it shouldn't be a tick box or, let's focus on the positives kind of side, because all that does is it just perpetuates the problems. Going back to data, this is really interesting, and this produced by Department for Education. So they asked all the qualified social workers to partake in a survey and to kind of note their ethnicity and where they are in their careers. Now, if you look at the first column, the total, it shows that 14.10% of qualified social workers identify as black, 14.10% of total workforce. In the kind of junior kind of case holder levels, they make up 17.8%, so overrepresented. However, in the senior practitioner level, so the first kind of step up, as it were, it's 12.6. So compared to 14.10 of the workforce, 12.6 shows underrepresentation. Then at first line manager, it goes to 10.4. Then middle manager 9.2. And then senior manager, it drops further to 4.8%. Now, you might be wondering what the issue is. Well, hopefully you're not wondering what the issue is. This shows that the word could be glass ceiling, racism, discrimination, inequality. But in our social work profession, social workers identified as black are being clearly prevented or not supported from progressing their careers. I mean, at senior manager level, it shrinks like a third. So suddenly they're just not able to progress and access those opportunities. In contrast, social workers identified as white British make up 75.4% of the workforce. Yeah, in the senior prac level, it's 76.7, overrepresented, 80.9 in the first line manager, 82% in middle manager, and 84% in senior manager, so overrepresented. And the terminology for that is white privilege. It's again terms some people kind of find contentious, but again the data speaks for itself. This is actual factual data. And it'd be good to kind of see the newer figures, but at the moment that's what we have, and that's what the data says. Linked to that is other data. So this was actually produced by Community Care, but it relates to data for practice, fitness to practice, kind of refers to Social Work England, and it highlights Black, Asian, and minority ethnic workers are twice as likely as white staff to be referred to fitness to practice, and significantly less likely to be appointed to jobs from shortlists. And that's the Workforce Race Equality Report that it's come from. Again, this is March 2024, not long ago. So this is something that's still ongoing, and it's really important to obviously grasp and understand this and the challenges faced by people who are Black and Asian in kind of coming into the workplace, because not only are there challenges in getting there, so in terms of getting the education, getting through school, college, university, all through that, then getting through placements in a social work degree, passing those, passing the ASYE, assisted, supported year in employment. But then there's also other hurdles in the workplace in terms of getting promoted, and ultimately it comes back to racism. This is kind of really important in kind of explaining the difference. So on the left here, equality. So you'll have organizations, we treat everyone equally. We have the same policy. Everyone has to go through the same application process, same interview process. Having that equal approach, it actually doesn't take into account of the inequalities that already exist, which in this case is demonstrated by height and stature, but can equally apply to race. Where the difference with equity is actually somebody needs a bit of a boost, and that's not through positive discrimination, it's through positive actions. So improving accessibility, support, allowing understanding that some people need more support. So if a demographic is facing a lot of racism and extra challenges, then how can we support them better? Because having the same bar across for everyone is actually quite discriminatory and disadvantageous for a lot of people. The reality, which is a sad reality, is actually a lot of the policies and things in the workplace, especially the workplace cultures, end up giving people who already have an advantage a bigger advantage. Classic example of this is staff end of year Christmas parties, for example. There'll be people who are excluded because they're not, for example, they don't celebrate Christmas as an example, or they kind of don't have, into that, don't drink alcohol or into the kind of culture of going out partying. So as an end of year celebration, if it's a Christmas party, in a hotel with alcohol, things like that, for example. For some people who are already quite privileged, that's fantastic for them, for their social development in terms of, you know, creating kind of connections, clicky culture, that kind of stuff, great. But they were, boosted even more. But for a lot of others who are already disadvantaged, it can be even more detrimental. And that's quite a big issue at the moment in a lot of workplaces, and it's one that's often ignored, which is disappointing, but it happens a lot. So this is why, we're coming back to equity. It's really important to A, honestly recognize the issues. B, um, when you're trying to address them, involve the people affected in addressing them in a meaningful way, not just tick box exercises, because they just waste everyone's time. And then C is also making sure that you measure the impact of what you've introduced. So not just a list of things we've introduced, but actually measuring the impact to address these inequalities. The reason it's important is whether it's young children, early getting a hair done, kids in school, nursery, they start to feel the impact of races and racism and things like that. Kids can often be cruel in their language as well, and if parents are saying something, they can pick up and repeat that in school. If you speak to a lot of children or even adults now, Black or Asian, there's a particular moment in time where it suddenly dawned on them that they're different. They'll go through, school, nursery, kind of, you don't recognize race, but then somebody says something racist, suddenly it hits them that, oh, hang on, that's offensive, I'm different, what's that about? Why am I treated less favorably? We can all just, especially if Black, reflect on those experiences and when that moment happened, because that does happen. Um, so yeah, so it's really important to kind of really understand and listen in a meaningful way and kind of bring about a positive change.